In today's video, I want to share the number one thing that I really wish I would have figured out much earlier on as I was designing patches for my live worship team. We're going to talk about all of the struggles that I went through trying to figure out how to balance the volumes of my patches. Hey everyone, David from Sunday Sounds here, and welcome to the second video in our series on building patches that sound great live. Now, when I was first starting out as a sound designer, using MainStage, using Ableton, most of the time I was building my presets with headphones on, and I would do this at home. And because I was using software, it was really easy for me to start paying a lot of attention to the numbers, making sure that every fader was at the exact same level, that I saw the same decibel readings for everything, that everything looked like it would be balanced. And I thought I did a pretty good job, but every time when I would get to church, when I would get to the venue, I would plug in and I would start to play, and I'd pretty soon start to see some dirty looks from my audio engineer because sounds would be too quiet, sounds would be blaring loud, and I didn't understand why for the longest time, because everything looked balanced. All of the faders were at the same level, all of the plugins were set to the same number volume, and I didn't understand why my sounds weren't coming across in a balanced way. Well, this is the one principle I talked about that I really didn't get. And I just want to say that perception is reality. While I was looking at these numbers and everything was lining up and it all looked like it should be balanced, I was ignoring the most important factor: people's ears, the way people hear sound. I was kind of hearing with my eyes and looking at all of these things on screen and thinking that that was what I needed to do, but I was spending so much time doing that I forgot to actually listen to how things sounded. See, the human ear is sensitive to some frequencies much more than others. Higher frequencies that are kind of where the human voice sits, the human ear is a lot more sensitive to those than to sort of low notes like what you might get from a kick drum or a bass sound. And so when I was mixing synth leads at the same volume as my warm pads or for my synth bass sounds, those synth leads would be much more aggressive and stand out a lot more in the mix because they were perceived by human ears as being a lot more aggressive, as being a lot louder. So if you keep this in mind, that perception, how people perceive the volume of a sound, is what largely determines whether or not it feels balanced, instead of just looking at the position of faders or numbers on a screen, then you're going to start to have a much easier time when it's time to start balancing out the volumes of your patches. It's okay to look at the faders and the numbers on screen, but at some point I recommend closing your eyes, looking away from the screen, and trusting your ears, thinking about how is this sound going to be perceived by the end user. So general rules of thumb: brighter, higher pitched sounds are going to be perceived as louder than they actually are. Sounds in the mid-range, it kind of depends on the character of the sound. And then lower notes, more bassy, heavy sounds, generally are perceived as less aggressive and less harsh to the human ear. So sometimes you might even need to make those sounds louder than you'd think, just to make sure that they actually come through and cut through in the mix as you would like. So perception is reality. If you're not thinking about how things are going to be perceived, how the human ear is going to hear them, then you're going to run into a lot of frustration. And that was definitely my experience starting out. In the next video, I'm going to talk about the number one skill that every sound designer, every person who builds patches for a live band needs to have. We're going to talk about EQ. So make sure that you catch the next video. Thanks for watching.